Right, I think we will get started. Let's get cracking here. So our final panel, which is rather straightforwardly titled The Future, Whither the Energiewende. So without further ado, I would like to dive straight in. We have another very distinguished panel assembled for you today, with a couple speakers also joining us virtually. Given the timing with the recent collapse of the coalition government, we had some people who weren't able to join us in person, but we are very fortunate to be able to have the individuals who will be speaking to you today. And first off, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Jörg Müllenhoff, who is head of program for the European Energy Transition at the Heinrich Böll Foundation, EU, in which capacity he covers EU energy policies and Europe's transition to a renewables-based energy system. He has 20 years of experience under his belt of working for associations and companies in the renewable energy sector, both in Germany and on the EU level. So Jörg, I will hand this over to you. We very much look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much for having me. Good evening or good afternoon from Brussels. I was invited to share a bit my thoughts about the development of the German energy transition, but also to give an outlook on the future of the energy transition from an EU perspective, from the European context, to bring forward your discussions. I will try to share my screen to show a few slides, just to give a bit of orientation, and I hope that this is now visible from my screen. Can you see it on the full screen now correctly?
We can indeed, yes.
Okay, perfect. So I learned that you just had an overview, an introduction about how the Energiewende became this kind of energy revolution, as I saw it in your program, if I got it right. Is it really a revolution? Well, I don't want to expand on that or discuss it. Maybe first introduce to you the institution I'm talking for. So I'm heading the European Energy Transition Program at Heinrich Böll Foundation, which is a German political foundation. The German system of political foundations is quite unique. I think you don't have that in the UK as such. It's the federal government that allocates funds to political foundations that are affiliated, recognized by political parties, but independent from the party politics, in order to allow for political education. So it comes maybe a bit from this thinking after Second World War that Germans need to be re-educated to learn how to be good Democrats again. And our namesake is Heinrich Böll. He's the literature Nobel Prize laureate of 1972. He symbolizes somehow the values, the ideas that we are striving for, that we try to embody. Our main areas, you see it already, of course, is the energy transition, is ecology, but also defense of freedom, human rights, civil rights, support minorities, and valuation of art and culture. He was a writer, so we don't have a politician like the other German political foundations as a namesake, which also already makes a little difference. So what is the energy transition as such? Basically for us, it means switching from fossil and nuclear to a fully renewable energy system, leaving this dark past behind us, which is a very centralized, top-down system where you have different separated infrastructures for different fossil fuels, for different energy carriers, and for nuclear. This is not very efficient, and we of course want to go towards a fully renewable energy system. This is the big picture, the landscape, where of course solar and wind are central, are key for this energy system. It is decentralized. It is of course running more interconnected, well-connected infrastructures where you have as a kind of joker maybe hydrogen. If I will talk a lot later about this topic that you can produce from excess solar and wind power mainly. But of course, we should not only think about electricity. This is also, of course, about providing heat, for instance, from geothermal energy or from solar thermal, and also, of course, from sustainable biomass, which is often forgotten. It has to be a much more flexible energy system, which is an abstract term for trying to better match demand and supply. To say it like this, often we only look on the catchy wind turbines or batteries, but there is much more of interaction of consumers and generators on both sides, and those roles are also merging more and more. So that the system really stays stable and reliable, like we know it from the past. So Energiewende, I mean, I'm happy that finally a more positive word has been introduced also in a broader global use, and is even popping up in some English dictionaries here and there. It started all in 1980. I think you already discussed about this, so I don't dig deeper into this topic about the history, but you can find the current challenges on our website. We have a big news website with blog articles, what's going on in the world of renewables, in the world of energy transitions, energytransition.org. So has it been a successful energy revolution? Personally, I would be a bit more careful with these big terms, with revolution, but indeed it's really putting upside down, as you saw it in this picture of the dark landscape and the renewable landscape. The system completely changes. It is changing. We are, of course, far from being there, but we already can see in many regions in Germany and also elsewhere in Europe that a locally anchored energy transition supported by citizens, anchored on the local ground, has been a success. Also, the early market liberalization driven by the European Union has been a big support, has been one of the pillars, I dare to say, so that renewable technologies, project developers were able to enter the markets and to offer now affordable renewable power, renewable energy on the markets. We have had in Germany, at least for some time in the beginning, a stable legal framework. The feed-in tariff is a classic instrument. It has been one of the export success models. Germany is not only exporting goods, but also very successful, I think, at least since the end of the 1990s, to export the feed-in tariff as a scheme to allow for market deployment of new renewable technologies. Now, of course, we are a bit in another area. Feed-in tariffs are maybe not the tool today in the EU anymore, but this has been a very important pillar of the success. And of course, you for sure will have discussed a bit about nuclear power when you talk about German energy politics. And there has been a lot of conflict, indeed, that was necessary. And that was also maybe at the beginning of the success of the renewables industry in Germany, of this energy transition, that people were looking for alternatives very early in the beginning. And there is now, besides this nuclear topic that let's say we almost closed this chapter at the beginning of a few months ago. We still have nuclear fuel production in Germany and uranium enrichment, but all in all, we don't use domestically produced nuclear electricity in the German electricity mix, which means all in all, there is a broad political consensus about the fact that we need renewables, that we need to increase the share of renewables. That has been done more or less successfully in Germany, with some hiccups, obviously, during the past 25 years. So in the end, I would say to end a bit this first part on a positive note, it's not the NIMBY effect, not in my backyard. It's yes, in my backyard, please. When you ask Germans, there is this regularly run survey by the German Renewable Energies Agency. My former employer and I accompanied this more sociological research for quite a while. And you see that indeed people who know the technology, who live in the neighborhood of a renewable energy installation, they know that it does not do major harm. On the contrary, it has a lot of benefits, not only for the environment, for the climate, but also economically speaking. People who know about these technologies, who are involved on the local ground, they support it. And luckily, we have a very high support in Germany in that regard for almost all technologies. So let's switch quickly to the EU. What do we have on the plate now? Can we bring this positive vibe maybe from Germany? I know there is a lot of, maybe you had potentially negative vibes in the room when talking about the breakup of the current coalition in Germany. But what does it mean for the EU level? Well, we just had here on the EU level the elections. Obviously, there is now a new legislative term that has started. Will it continue like the previous one, where we had the European Green Deal as the big European flagship project of Mrs. von der Leyen during her first mandate? Pretty much exactly 1 year ago, or 5 years ago, at the end of 2019, when she started, she unveiled this European Green Deal project, which is basically really the translation of the energy transition on the EU level, with a, of course, much broader focus, where you want to diversify, change basically the whole way how we run our economy within the EU. To achieve climate neutrality by the year 2050, Europe to be the first climate neutral continent worldwide. So this package of EU laws started pretty much soon in 2020 with the pandemic, and they kept course. They did not change this. There were, of course, some governments saying, well, climate ambition, renewables, that's too expensive. Why should we continue this? We are now in a global crisis in the pandemic. Let's push the pause button. And the Commission didn't do that, the Parliament didn't do that, and the majority of member states neither. So we had in 2021 this big Fit for 55 legislative package, where the Commission describes how to achieve a 55% emission reduction by the year 2030. This is the kind of umbrella thing that was the guiding overarching target. That was then reconfirmed again with the Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine in early 2022, when again, some people said, let's push the pause button, let's stop this, it's too expensive, we have many other issues now with Ukraine being invaded, and let's forget about this Green Deal, energy transition, and so on. But of course, this was obviously much more difficult to defend because the Ukraine invasion also had to do a lot, and that was obvious with our dependency on fossil fuels, and we saw the impact quite quickly with the fossil gas price crisis that started already a bit earlier with Russia cutting, reducing gas supplies to EU gas storage facilities. So just to give you an overview of what really drove the energy transition towards renewables, towards more energy efficiency during the past 5 years, there is, of course, the revised Renewable Energy Directive that increased very clearly the share of renewables as the target for 2030. It means that this is all aligned. We need that. This is the European Commission's methodology to say, okay, we need 55% emission reductions, and that is to be translated into the different sectors. Like from renewable energy, we need at least 45% share to get close to this 55% emission reduction. There are also sectoral targets, as you might know, of course, for energy efficiency, for energy savings, and for the building sector, for heatings, and so on for the industry. This is all now to be put in place to be implemented by the member states on the national ground. Important instrument will be the national energy and climate plans that you can use as a kind of monitor to track the progress of renewables in the different member states. We also reformed here on the EU level our gas and electricity markets to accelerate the rollout of renewables. That was very clear and confirmed after the Russian invasion with this Repower EU package, where you saw also quite some member states, even very conservative ones, saying, okay, now it's really about to become independent of fossil fuel imports. This is a matter of security of supply, independently from the question of achieving ambitious climate targets or not. So this is basically where we are, and this is a huge, really historic achievement without any doubt. We are still far away from the 1.5 degree threshold of global temperature increase that we have enshrined in the Paris Agreement. So 55% emission reduction is fine, but 55 is not fit for 1.5, to be honest. Still, everybody, of course, here in Brussels, I would say, is working to get this done, to achieve this, and to bring this into the next term, in the new legislative term. And you might have seen after the elections in June, the European elections, the European Parliament changed its composition. And we have now the European People's Party, the Christian Democrats, Conservatives, center-right as the kingmaker. Meaning that they can decide whether they go with a center-left majority, with liberals from the Renew Europe group and the Social Democrats S&D group, potentially with the Greens, Greens in the elections. The EPP, the Conservatives, can also look to their right, where the share of populists, far-right, extremist parties increased massively. And they can look for majorities with, for instance, with the ECR group, which is where the Tories, when the UK was still part of the European Union, the Tories were sitting there, the Polish Peace Party, or the Italian Fratelli d'Italia, the post-fascist party of Meloni. So this is all another setting, another power play that we observe here now. The majority that we had before with Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Liberals, Greens pushing for ambitious climate and renewables targets, that is now questionable. Also, when you see that in the European Council, where the governments of the member states gather to decide about EU legislation as a kind of second chamber. There you have also a very clear majority of conservative governments run by the EPP. So it's all about Ursula von der Leyen's group, her party, her group, her party political family, and the national governments run by these parties to decide about the future. And they have decided to drop the green. Don't say Green Deal anymore, say Clean Industrial Deal. That's what Ursula von der Leyen revealed as being one of the new flagship projects in her new 5-year legislative term when she was re-elected in July. She unveiled these priorities, these political guidelines, where she basically confirmed that the Green Deal will not be dropped, as some of the more conservative, right-leaning, populist wings of her family were suggesting here and there, but to continue implementation, while, however, shifting the focus on industrial policy. It's all about competitiveness, about making EU industries competitive or competitive again, with, of course, with the help of cheap energy. You see that as a kind of red thread in all the documents, in the publications from von der Leyen, from her new European Commission, when you look into the mission letters that she sent to the new commissioners, to the new energy commissioner, competition commissioner, and so on. It's all about making industry competitive, to focus on supporting, promoting the industry, to ensure that we get the raw materials to build, to manufacture all these technologies, all these installations here, to make it as fast as possible. We had already an acceleration of the permitting processes during her first term with this Repower EU package after the Ukraine invasion. And this all should help to bring the bills down for the companies and also for the households that are much less prominent when you look a bit into the programs and the ideas that are presented here and there now. Another very influential paper that you might be aware of is the Draghi report. So Mario Draghi published this report. He was commissioned by the Commission basically to prepare this report about what are the strategically most important things to be implemented for the new Commission. So this is a bit, maybe not the playbook, but where you can also see how in detail the Commission might work during the next 5 years, what might be interesting or important for them. It's of course this global race for clean technologies, how to be prepared and react to the Chinese exports, how to also align with what happens in the US with a very efficient IRA. And again, how can we as the EU enable access of our companies, our industries to cheap energy? And that can only be renewables. That at least is very clear. So you don't have the big Green Deal energy transition headline everywhere like 5 years ago, but you see under the surface of clean industrial deal, a kind of new EU industrial policy, you see that everything relies in the end on very quick access to cheap renewables. Wind and solar have saved us already billions during the energy price crisis due to the high shares of solar and wind on the wholesale markets, on the wholesale electricity markets. And this is now to be even more accelerated and rolled out. Will this all be successful? I mean, when you look back to how it started and what were those pillars of success of this, what you might name a revolution, I talked already a bit about decentralization, about direct access of citizens, the local base that you need, the energy transition that is something that is locally anchored. And we ask ourselves here in Brussels now, is it still a citizens-led energy transition? If you scrap the green in the deal, if you make it a clean industrial deal, if it's only about competitiveness, that's fine. We need very quickly and a lot of EU-produced wind turbines, solar panels, again, ideally, and so on. That would be great. But of course, you might miss out about this, let's say, societal aspect and the social dimension, which is crucial when you think about the backlash that we face already when it comes to local rollout of renewables. Of course, the big majority from the survey that I showed you, be it in Germany, be it elsewhere, is still in favor of renewables. But still, of course, we see that the far right is using this, is jumping on this topic to use frustration of people about their energy bills, about other topics, to use this as a fuel for more anger about the political system in general, but also to slow down anything that is related to climate protection, anything that is related to the energy transition, to blame it for whatever and to use it for scaremongering, blackouts, whatever you can imagine. So how can we react? On the EU side, we as the Heinrich Böll Foundation, we say we need to strengthen again the social dimension of the energy transition. We need to show how we can use the existing EU law and how to potentially even more improve it so that households also can access directly the benefits of renewables, and they should be able to do that in a much easier way. They should see really the benefits on their bill, ideally, not only talking about electricity, but also about heating and renovation, how to get the capital, access to money to get your home renovated, how to do this in a faster way, and to ensure that we target those who are most in need. Because by now, to be honest, you can argue that the energy transition was a middle class, upper class project, a kind of elitist idea. People who can afford gadgets like nice, fancy electric vehicles and heat pumps. This is not how it should end. We need to roll these technologies out to everybody and prioritize those who are most in need, who are the vulnerable or energy poor households in our societies, so that there is in the end a fair allocation of costs and benefits. So clean industrial deal, yes, great, let's continue, but also keep an eye on the distributional impacts. So that's a bit my input, and sorry for being a bit too long, probably.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jörg. That was extremely comprehensive, and I'm sure we'll return to a lot of those points that you raised in the discussion Q&A. Let's move swiftly on. I would next like to introduce Eva Schmid. Dr. Eva Schmid is head of the Hydrogen and Synthetic Energy Carriers Working Group in the German Energy Agency's Future of Energy Supply Division. Dr. Schmid holds a doctorate from the TU Berlin, and her department supports the German government in implementing its national hydrogen strategy. So again, a lot there, I think, to delve into. If you have the floor, we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would have loved to be with you, but I could not make it. I'm sorry about that. So we need to live with the digital version. So I would like to share some thoughts with you about the hydrogen market ramp up. So to start with, why is that actually important? And most of the time, people justified with climate neutrality, which is, of course, a very big motivation to go into hydrogen. But when you look at hydrogen solutions compared to direct electrification, for example, oftentimes other solutions are more effective in terms of climate mitigation. So actually, you need a second reason for why you would move to hydrogen, and that is resilience from my point of view. Because so what is resilience is the ability of a system to regain its functionality after a shock. And basically, hydrogen gives resilience feature to a renewable energy system, particularly because you can store it, you can provide seasonal storage and re-electrify it. You can store it in terms of derivatives. So if you produce fuels, for example, methanol or other derivatives from hydrogen, you can store them. You can use them in other sectors. And finally, you use hydrogen as feedstock for industry, and particularly the chemical industry can then still exist basically in a climate neutral future because it uses hydrogen derivatives as an input. And that in itself is also a form of resilience of the industry as we know it today. Hydrogen is also critical infrastructure in the future. So I don't know if you talked about the Kritis. Kritis is the German word of saying this, a critical infrastructure, which is basically a whole world in itself in terms of how you need to take care of this infrastructure, also in the face of security threats. So in Germany, you have probably heard of this. We have this hydrogen strategy in order to ramp everything up. And I would like to share some thoughts with you today, which forces are actually dominant at the moment in this hydrogen ramp up. So I want to look at what pushes, what pulls, and what is keeping back at the moment. So what's pushing actually the hydrogen ramp up? And here my take is that currently hydrogen applications are not economic, they're not in the money, and waiting is actually rational. So there's very little forces that actually push the hydrogen ramp up at the moment. Natural gas prices or fossil gas prices are relatively low again. The certificate prices for CO2 are relatively low again. The regulatory situation for hydrogen is complicated. So we had this huge discussion, what's green hydrogen? We have decided on a regime, but it's pretty complicated to actually fulfill that. And electrification, as I already said, is more economic in many sectors. So actually the combination of fossil gas and CCU as a so-called technology open solution is gaining more traction, but obviously that has a lot of insecurities and or uncertainties and risks inherent, but we're seeing a rise of that option in the debate at the moment. So the kind of forces that push hydrogen at the moment are relatively weak. What's pulling? So another force could be that you have this idea of the future and it pulls you so strongly that actually things move forward. And also here I have a take at the moment that the uncertainties are greater than the confidence or the trust in the future. And that shows mainly because there is the biggest problem at the moment in the German hydrogen ramp up is the lack of offtake. So there's not enough or not any at some point buyers that are willing to actually sign the contracts today, and we need those signatures in order to get the investments bankable. There's some positive news with some important projects of common European interest, the IPSAI projects. Actually, in the last months, we had some investment decision, but these are just some small percentages of the total. So there's still a lot of unsolved challenges, particularly with regard to hedging the risks that you need to hedge in order to get the bankability of the projects, and the offtake is the leading issue. So Germany has succeeded in building a hydrogen, or not in building, that's not, we didn't, that's a couple of years, but it has succeeded with putting up a framework to build the core grid, the so-called. So that's the positive news. But it's not enough, and the expectation at the moment is that hydrogen and its derivatives will remain pretty expensive comparatively, and a scarce good in the foreseeable future. And the current set of instruments and what's out there is not yet sufficient to actually give this full attraction. So the third force is what's keeping back. And here I want to highlight two manifested structural problems from the past that still remain unsolved. One is the cost of capital problem. So in international terms, so we have known this problem for a long time, that cost of capital is much more expensive in those regions of the world where renewable potential is high. You need renewable electricity for the hydrogen. So this whole idea of importing large amounts of derivatives by ship or also by pipeline remains a big challenge that investment in these countries has to find a solution for this cost of capital problem. And we're still waiting for that solution. There is things in place, but it's not sufficient to get that stuff moving. And second, through climate mitigation policy, the fossil gas industry is supposed to retreat massively, and that leads to distribution issues and distribution politics, basically, in which hydrogen is often put forward as a kind of seeming solution that is actually not a solution, and that should not be forgotten when talking about hydrogen. So in sum, if that's a kind of a triangle, these three types of forces, my take is that those forces that keep the hydrogen ramp up slow are dominant. And I'll see if I succeed. I want to share my screen just for a picture. Maybe you can see it.
Yes.
So that's a mid-journey picture, and that's how I imagine the hydrogen ramp up at the moment of some of these forces. So we have imagined this hydrogen ramp up very strongly, so we can totally picture how it would look like, but it doesn't have any traction. So this dog does not have its feet grounded on the floor, and we're trying to pull it, but it's doubtful that it works that way. So if that's very depressing for you, I just want to spend just some words of how this could get better, or how this could move on. I think one kind of context that we really need to keep in mind when thinking this hydrogen ramp up further is that we are actually in times of a poly crisis, and we have an international very concerning security situation. And in that context, the idea that we will always ship hydrogen derivatives simply by conventional shipping routes, we need to think about that. We also need to actually consider the solution that hydrogen gives us, what kind of the value of this option is in a more tense security situation. And here actually solutions like methanol are attractive. The solution to actually store hydrogen is attractive, but it's due to a different function, right? So the resilience aspect of the hydrogen, that it can serve the energy system, the renewable energy system, would get an additional value. Actually, you do meet people from military that investigate how they can get synthetic methanol in the future, because they find it very interesting from a military perspective. That's a conversation that you get recently on ordinary hydrogen conferences, and that's a very new aspect. And I think we need to actually acknowledge the current situation in order to assess who's valuing the options that hydrogen gives you. And to sum up or to conclude, I think these at the time where we always say like the technology openness is something we value as a value in itself. I think we should overcome that, because it will just open the door to that fossil fuel and CCS future that is not really providing the solution for what we need to accompany the renewable electricity system. And ultimately, we need a clear picture of what kind of hydrogen derivatives we need for what. So the sectors that actually need hydrogen from a climate mitigation perspective most, because there's no alternatives, which is the chemical industry, which is the marine fuels, which is aviation, and also in part probably the steel sector, and that it's a little bit advanced. But for the other sectors, we see at the moment no traction at all. And I think that really needs to change, and we need more commitment to actually reduce this technology and openness, and focus more on what actually is wanted, and then have dedicated activities for that. That's it.
Fantastic. Eva, thank you very much for that tour de force through the current ins and outs, really, of the current debate around hydrogen, which, again, I imagine people may have questions about later. Before we move on to the discussion and ultimately the Q&A, though, we are very fortunate today in having with us in person Simon Müller, who is the Germany director for leading think tank Agora Energiewende, where he heads Agora's work in Germany on overarching energy and climate policy issues, as well as in the areas of electricity, heat, and energy infrastructure. Over the past 10 years, Simon has advised governments in over 20 countries on 6 continents and joined Agora from the International Energy Agency. So we very much look forward to hearing your contribution.
Yeah, I'll
please do
stand up so we have a little bit of change of scenery in the last input of the day. So thank you very much for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to speak here. I'm very happy about that. In my intervention, I'd like to touch on 3 main areas. The first one is, what do the past years tell us about where Germany's energy transition, the Energiewende, is headed? Then in a second part, what actually matters most from a substance perspective in the coming years? And in the third and final part, I'll speculate a little bit. How will things play out politically? And I can already tell you now, I'll be wrong about the third part, but maybe in an interesting way. So let's get started with the first part. So where do we stand today, and what does that actually tell us about the future of Germany's energy transition? I would say that Germany has actually made substantial progress in accelerating its trajectory towards climate neutrality over the past 3 years, and actually more so than what is currently apparent. The quickest indicator is always the deployment of solar PV, and we're now at a point where we're at around 17.5, 18 gigawatts of deployment for this year. So really breaking the records that we saw in the early 2010s, and this already for the 2nd year in a row. Of course, there are problems that are associated with that, with grid integration and so forth, but it's just something to note that really this acceleration has worked. And more importantly, as it comes to land-based wind, onshore wind, we have an absolute record situation now for the permits. So these are the plants of the future where for the first time Germany broke the 10 gigawatt mark. And this is about a doubling of the previous record and a five-fold increase compared to the actual deployment that we're seeing. So the early indicators are really pointing in the right direction. Similarly, when it comes to grid expansion and planning, for the first time, actually the grid operators have tabled a plan for a grid that functions for climate neutrality, for full climate neutrality. In the past, all the plans were incremental and only for the next 10 years. Now, of course, this immediately led to a situation that people also saw what the bill would be and are now largely focused on the 600 billion of investment that are needed until 2045, most of it actually in the coming 10 years. But it's also really a great step forward of having this target vision. And of course, it will change over time, but also this is actually good news. And the third area is that Germany is finally tackling the end-use sectors. It's still a laggard in this area. Its CO2 reductions, which are at historically high levels, by the way, the downward trajectory, are still very much focused on the power sector. But with the building energy law and with the first wave of climate protection contracts in industry, the government is actually now tackling these areas. And this brings me to challenging what Jakob Schland mentioned in his first intervention, of saying that actually the world doesn't have anything to learn from Germany in a way, or that there's no front-runner role anymore. I would say to truly appreciate this, it's very instructive to also look at other countries. And I would say that no other large industrialized country sees this combination of acceleration, of already having reached a high level of renewables, notably with a moderate resource endowment, and a very comprehensive strategy across the different sectors. And of course, there are a lot of debates going on, a lot of political disagreement, but I would argue that these are some of the problems that other countries are only going to come to experience, especially when it comes now to the question of how much negative emissions will we allow in the system, how do we do, the whole carbon management of this, natural sinks and so forth, to link to agriculture. All these are debates where in many countries, I think you would need to wait another 2 to 3 years for them to reach where Germany stands. That's not that Germany has everything figured out, but I would still say there is a runner role. Third and last point on where we stand at what it means for the future. I think that the concept of climate neutrality and the support for renewables have somewhat outgrown the Energiewende. The Energiewende is a politically charged term in Germany. It has always been also a societal movement that kind of challenged the established way of doing things, going from a centralized power center to a more decentralized way of going about things, a democratization of energy that also has a clear political agenda behind it. And of course, it finds its crystallization point from this huge centralization of a nuclear power plant and the large decentralization of rooftop solar PV. These are the antipodes, in a way, that you see in the concept of the Energiewende. And funny enough, in surveys, you now see that while Energiewende might still get somewhat mixed reviews or not the enthusiastic support of the past, it is very clear that in wide parts of society, renewables are seen as the cheapest option. And also that climate protection, even for people who see themselves as being structurally conservative somewhere in the countryside, climate protection is really important. And I think this is really a good foundation for the coming years. Second part. So what matters going forward? I would say these are 3+1 issues. First, industry and economic competitiveness more broadly. Second, making progress in the consumer-centric or citizen-centric areas of buildings and transport. And third, bringing down electricity prices. I think these will be the decisive areas that will determine whether progress will succeed or not in the coming years. When it comes to the economic crisis, I think there are competing narratives out there right now, what is happening to German industry. My diagnosis would be that we have an alignment of different factors that are happening. First, it is true that the price shock of the fossil energy crisis and the ripple effects that it still has on the system, that those have dealt a pretty bad blow, especially to the energy-intensive part of the industry. But this is now compounded with an effect where a sluggish economy in China and generally more restrictive trade is hitting Germany's export-oriented standard business model. And that's where also the sale of internal combustion engines are struggling, high-value chemicals, all the stuff that kind of is the bedrock of German competitiveness. But this meets a situation where I would argue that the investment framework that is needed for climate neutrality still has holes. Put a little bit too extreme, the Fit for 55 package was a massive investment program missing the investment instruments. If you look at the way European state aid is constructed, if you look at the way that you have support systems in place now for industry, they are not yet at a point where investments can really move forward, where you really have a solid business case and you have the certainty. So in a way, both is true. We have a crisis of the conventional model, but we have a concurrent crisis of the future model. Heat pump sales are down, EV sales are down, battery manufacturing companies are going out of business, hydrogen companies are going out of business. So you see, the old model doesn't work because of the geopolitical factors and the environment things, but it's clear it's not a trajectory into the future. But the new stuff is held back because there's not really an investment framework for it. And then the fourth component in industry is really, and it's been said before, the concerning thing is not so much that large companies fail. The concerning thing is that think about the 3 big new companies that Germany has come up with in the last 10 years. Right? That's the problem. There are none. So this is really an issue in terms of having the innovation for future growth. How am I doing on time? All right. I'll take your word for it. So second area, what matters going forward, buildings and transport. The way also my organization, Agora Energiewende, has gone about proposing policies, and we've done so since 2012. And the founding director, Rainer Barke, was very strongly involved in negotiating the first wave of the nuclear phase-out in Germany. I think the policy tradition also of Agora Energiewende has been to regulate quickly in a way and in a subtle and smart way, and then imposing the change by that means, and at the same time empowering the willing. But now that climate protection is moving close to citizens, and we also have to talk about what's not going to happen anymore, we need policies that really work for everybody. We need policies that are discussed in a space that is not accessible always to rational debate or that follows different rationalities. If a company realizes that the framework conditions have changed, it will simply adapt to it and do its strategy. People might simply reject it, reactants, all the psychological phenomena that we could observe in the debate around the building energy law. And I think finding a fresh approach for convincing people to go along with the changes in their lives, and also having a way of actually making that feasible for everybody is also going to be a decisive factor. And the third point are the electricity prices. We're speaking about the energy transition after Nord Stream, and so gas is, of course, a super important consideration here, right? 75% of Germany's gas consumption actually is used for temperature applications up to 200 degrees centigrade. I mean, this is thermodynamic madness in a way, right? Because it's very low value heat applications that we're talking about. It's space heating and low temperature heat in industry. The electricity price determines how quickly that can be electrified, because technically it's very easy. So finding ways to bring down electricity prices is essentially for the coming legislative term what the whole question of permitting, acceleration, and having surface for wind area was for this legislative term. And here there are big debates about how do we finance infrastructure, how do we finance the grids, why do we pay roads from the general public budget, why do we pay grids from levies coming from consumers, what ways are there to really make it affordable for everybody, not just industry but also households. And this leads, these 3 areas, industry, buildings and transport, and the electricity prices, they kind of all lead to one big question, which is how are these huge investments going to be financed? And that's, of course, not possible in the current fiscal regime that Germany has. There will need to be a reform of the debt brake. The Conservatives are already sending signals that they're willing to compromise on this, but it will be decisive to what extent that actually gives the necessary money and financial leeway, not just for that stuff that has a business case, not just for that stuff that actually increases the productivity of the economy as a whole, but really also for the required compensation payments for those that are really hit hard by the shift towards climate neutrality. So, how will all this play out politically? The first thesis that I would say is Germany's path to climate neutrality is locked in. Now, of course, when you look at the climate crisis, my biggest worry is always that my children or my son and maybe his children sit there and kind of the world is in very bad shape, and they realize we, standing here now, had what it took to actually solve the problem, and we implemented the solutions. We just did it 10 years too late. So, you know, the fact that it's locked in by itself is good and it's an achievement, but that immediately leads to the next question. What will it mean for the speed at which Germany is moving forward? And I think, even being an optimist, I would expect that there will be a number of setbacks in Germany in terms of the pace that we see in its climate and energy ambition. This is linked to the fact that it's essentially certain that the next chancellor will be conservative Friedrich Merz, who has been quite solid on the general climate ambition, but I think when it then comes to how much are we going to hassle people with really, you know, doing some changes in their lives, how much will we push grid operators to push ahead with integrating large amounts of solar PV, I think the political momentum might fade a bit. And the litmus test for all this, in my view, kind of the canary in the coal mine, will be how Germany and Europe deals with the ETS2. Because it's very clear we have a strong instrument, and the ETS1 for that matter. We have very strong price-based instruments on the European level. That's the instrument of choice for climate neutrality claimed by the conservatives in Germany. But actually, they have much bigger teeth than people realize. So what do you do about it? And navigating this, I think, will be the main challenge, but also kind of the part where you can see in a very succinct way where Germany is headed. Third and final point of this whole intervention, so glad we're almost at the discussion. I would say to really reinvigorate the push for climate neutrality, also the Energiewende narrative in its broadest possible sense, right? This push to climate neutrality, we do need a new narrative. And in a way, the picture that also Agora Energiewende painted in the early 2010s was inherently conservative. It portrayed a country that was still hosting all its energy-intensive industry, but simply the chimney wasn't emitting CO2 anymore. There was the same steel production, the same chemicals production. It was the same car industry. There was no structural shift in the economic fabric. And of course, the kind of dimension of changes we see in relative energy prices will have also implications for Germany's economic model. And the real question is not so much what will we need to let go, that's already fairly clear, but also what's the prosperity of the future going to be founded on? And I think this, having clarity on this, having the discussions on this, building the consensus on this, will be hugely important in order to sustain and rebuild the political momentum to actually get to climate neutrality on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. So we will move shortly to the Q&A with all of you. But I do want to raise one point for our panel here, which ties together some of the elements that were raised earlier in this session. Now, Simon, of course, mentioned an intervention that was made earlier by one of our other speakers today, Jakob Schland, who, for those of you, Eva and Jörg, weren't able to join us earlier. Essentially, the point was made that the Energiewende is no longer uniquely German in any meaningful sense, as the country is no longer a leader in the same way, perhaps, that it used to be. And as a result, the very term Energiewende is no longer useful as such. And I'm curious to the three, I would like to hear from the three of you. I mean, to what extent would you say perhaps the way in which the Energiewende has been significantly powered through, for example, small-scale producers. I mean, this is, of course, something that Jörg picked up on earlier, the so-called, Bürgerenergie or even Bürgerenergiewende, as some might perhaps call it, or this idea, as Jörg said before, of an energy transition driven by citizens to a certain extent. To what extent does this aspect of the Energiewende, which in many ways does set it apart from a lot of energy transitions that we've seen in other countries, render the term Energiewende still a meaningful concept for the world, if we want to put it in those terms? Whoever wants to pick up on that first.
If I don't know.
Go for it.
Is that a relevant question? Whether this term Energiewende as a German version. So I think that was my thought when I listened to you in a way, because I mean, the point is that Germany started off as in a kind of leading position, and then, but it didn't do that just because it wanted to do this German project, right? It was because there was a relatively early idea that in order to mitigate climate change, we need to do this. And I think then I think there's a lot of answers on how you actually implement the Energiewende, which is depends on the idiosyncratics of the country. So in Denmark, there's other cultural logics and other dispositions as compared to UK or anywhere else on the globe on a different continent, right? And also Germans are quite particular with some aspects. So I think there's just like huge variations now. And then I don't know if nobody should like follow exactly the Energiewende, because then they would inherit some not so useful German traits as well. Maybe they would also inherit useful ones, but so I think we need to diversify culturally with that term. And then also like learn from other countries. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go, but I don't think we should see that Energiewende as the only role model.
Oh yes, no,
I thought.
No, I think we're talking more about whether or not it's still useful to think about, I guess, the Energiewende. If I'm not characterizing, would you like to? Oh yes. I think I'm making this point and raising this question very much as a foreigner, right? As a foreigner who also spent a lot of time actually growing up in and living in Germany. Of course, outside Germany, one of the aspects of the transition that especially stands out is the extent to which you have a lot of small-scale producers. How, to go back to perhaps Hans-Josef Fehr's contribution at the very beginning of our conference today, talking about how in the early 2000s in particular, you saw this almost exponential increase of renewables deployed in Germany and the extent to which that was driven by small-scale producers. Because, of course, just now, Simon mentioned the question of political momentum and how the political momentum might fade a bit in the next legislative term with a change in government. And one of the big issues that you see around the world is the fact that with changing governments, changing political tides, you often see big shifts when it comes to progress on the climate front, right? And so this is perhaps one of the elements that's interesting.
So,
yes?
I mean, of course, you can't think of the Energiewende in Germany without the question of nuclear, right? Because that was really kind of the intent behind it, was also to show that it's possible to decarbonize a power sector without relying on nuclear energy. And it's interesting in the German debate how there is a kind of re-emergence also of this nuclear question. I don't think that actually in the end there is going to be much happening. I think unfortunately it's a waste of political energy simply for economic reasons. But I must say that against the potentially apocalyptic consequences of the climate crisis, I think the whole debate around nuclear has experienced a bit of a shift. I mean, the risks are essentially the same, right? But if I would look personally, should you stop other countries, which Germany has done politically on a European level, kind of dissuade other countries from going about nuclear. There's this old antagonism between Germany and France in this question. And there I would say, well, you know, if we just all focus on getting to climate neutrality on time, we've helped the planet quite a bit, right? And if it's really true that renewables are so much easier, faster, and so forth, you know, they will simply prevail. But there's other ideas and concepts behind the Energiewende that I think are more important than ever, which is the idea of creating a citizens project that actually has widespread support locally. And this is needed not just in the electricity sector, but this is actually now needed to bring decarbonization to your heating, to your car, to the way you go about your nutrition, many, many things. And if this kind of movement emerges, and if it has one very important change, which is that it doesn't depend whether you have the savvy or the finances to kind of do the upfront investment, which you needed for the rooftop PV, but if it's something that really is a movement that you can join irrespective on how much money you have in the bank, I think then the fundamental idea of the Energiewende will be more alive than ever and more needed than ever.
Great, thank you. Jörg, do you have any thoughts on this?
I agree very much with what Simon just said. It's about the local participation. People really see the benefits. They can harvest those renewables right in their neighborhood. And this is the big difference when you compare it with fossil fuels or with nuclear power. There you have globally active big corporate players with a lot of capital, and you cannot participate as a normal, ordinary household or citizen. Honestly, obviously, these cooperatives and solar rooftop installations, they might not save the huge energy demand and cover the huge energy demand of the German steel industry alone. We need large-scale centralized offshore wind and other technologies probably to get there to affordable energy prices for those industries, and also to achieve climate neutrality. But when it comes to the social acceptance and the acceptability of these technologies, this is basically what makes the big difference. Renewables are the local sources that you can find basically everywhere, and where you can get back your control of your energy bill, of your environment. It's a beautiful starting point for reviving your community, your neighborhood. I experienced that being a member of a local energy community in Germany years ago, having accompanied many local projects in my previous job in the German renewables industry. You can see that this is really much more about just, it goes beyond the technology and beyond the pure kilowatt hours. It's something that is a kind of societal movement. And that's the strength, and that is something we should somehow ensure also in the future. Now that everything is scaled up somehow, I talked about the clean industrial deal. We should think about the roots and the initial big difference that make these technologies compared to others, and why people like them. This is still, I think, what I dare to say. This is something that works, and the advantages are very obvious and tangible for citizens who are not energy geeks like me.
Great, thank you very much. On that note, we're going to turn this over to the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand, and please wait until the microphone comes to you. Yes, Jakob.
Jakob Schland, ex-editor-in-chief of Tagesspiegel, background, energy and climate. Firstly, I'd like to applaud Dr. Schmidt, because it's quite rare that experts in a certain field are so honest, almost brutally honest, with the importance or the prospects of their area of expertise, which is hydrogen. So thank you very much for these insights. I found that really, really interesting. And I'd also like to ask you and Simon Müller about this. We've seen quite a few studies about the costs of hydrogen and the import prospects and so on. I mean, the wall isn't crumbling down, falling down, but it has structural deficits at the moment. How important is that for all the major plans, the big 5 studies, and the plans of the German government and so on for the transition? So are we missing major bricks now, or is this fixable by a little bit more electrification? So do we need a big overhaul because of the new developments in hydrogen, or can we just, sort of fix it? I would be really interested in your opinion on that.
Eva, did you hear that?
Yes.
Great.
Do we need a big overhaul? So in terms of the lead studies, the light scenario, I think actually not that much, because they had always, or have always had, pretty conservative assumptions about hydrogen. So I think also energy system models that have stuff endogenously modeled, so are missing less bricks. I think the point I tried to make was to have a more clear-headed picture of where we are at the moment, as opposed to the story we've heard for a long time that hydrogen will be so cheap, right? That it will be like table water and you can use it for anything, which has never been true. And it shows now that it's not true. And I think those who were doing like serious science about us have always known, so they are not that surprised. Where I think we do actually need to reshuffle some bricks is a technology that I find super interesting at the moment is thermal heat storage. If that technology in development, which is a very low-tech technology to store heat with bricks or sand, for example, and apparently it has pretty high efficiency and a technology readiness level higher than hydrogen. And it could apparently deliver heat up to 1,200, 1,400 degrees. If that holds and it's actually scalable in terms of the size of the storage you need, you could supply process heat to a lot of industry, where at the moment they're planning with hydrogen because they have always burned things. And I hear from industry or those who are trying to help industry and decarbonize, that there's actually big kind of cultural resistance in industry, because process heat has always been derived from a burning process, basically. And here I think it could be that a large share of what we think that hydrogen demand will be at the moment for at least the low temperature process heat could actually shift to that technology if it delivers. And so I think we kind of, that's the bricks are being kind of retweaked. And the other thing is, we assume in these scenarios a lot of things. For example, we assume that there will be imports of green ammonia, or we assume that there will be imports of green methanol. And we need to have much more clear and envisioning a policy. I think, Simon, you ended also on that note, basically, that we need a clear vision and to implement it, basically. And for those derivatives, methanol, and other fuels, that we need to make those bricks happen, basically. We don't need to reshuffle a lot, but yeah. That's my take on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eva.
So I would say there are two main hydrogen discourses, right? There is one that sits with the community of very ambitious and rapid decarbonization based mainly on electrification, and then sees hydrogen for residual applications. And then there's a climate delay discourse that essentially says, let's try to keep everything as much as possible the way it is now, and we can simply use this energy carrier not to do much, and we swap it out one for the other, and this will happen at some point in the future. And in both of these worlds, hydrogen has come under pressure. Why? Well, in the delay discourse, because the stages of planning have now become so concrete and clear, it's also becoming more clear where basically this is a check that's going to bounce, right? Because in municipal heat planning and some of the industrial applications, you simply see it's too expensive for those customers who are actually demanding it. And in the space where it's about serious decarbonization, the problem is that, as Eva described, the technology is under pressure because it's constantly and will always be competing with other alternatives that have a very high technological dynamism. And the other part is, because it is part kind of the emissions endgame, it does take a lot of climate impetus to pay for the learning curve of the technology. And I would say where in this world, where I would have seen a lot of the hydrogen ambition that the German government was doing, where hydrogen got really a very bad blow is when the power plant strategy was changed from the version that it had in August 2023, where it was a very ambitious element for scaling up hydrogen, to the version that came afterwards, which only had a residual of 500 megawatts of power plants. And this broke, this kind of took away one of the main customers. And I would say, well, is it going to hurt later down the road? I think it's one of those components that has a long build-up time, a lot of infrastructure that is behind it, and we might sit here again in 5 or 10 years, and if we didn't persist with building up this infrastructure, we're like, shit. Why didn't we do it? Yeah. So I think this is the moment where it will really come out. You can get a lot of emissions reduction still on the way, where you don't really notice that something is going wrong, and people just stop talking about hydrogen, and you just use gas plants a little bit longer. And of course, sorry, last point. You now see the emergence of other discourses of delay, right? CCS and you name it. Nukes. So there's also this component that could also lead to delay on climate action.
Great, thank you very much.
Could you imagine the contrary as well, that there's going to be a moment? Like
okay, sorry, could you repeat that with a microphone, just so our online audience can hear you?
Sorry, could you imagine the contrary moment as well? Bollocks, why did we do it? Because these other technologies that are competing are so much more successful?
The funny thing is about overbuilding infrastructure, that usually people don't have regrets for a long time. So we're actually sending a lot of the PV to France from Germany with the overcapacity of grids with the large capacity of grids that France erected to actually push the overcapacity of nuclear that they built from their country to Germany because they overestimated their own electricity demand. And a lot of the innovative business models that we see today in tech were actually built on an overbuilt infrastructure of fiber optics. So I would say there's an asymmetry of risk between overbuilding an infrastructure, underbuilding an infrastructure, because funny enough, when something stands around, we do tend to find a way of doing something with it. So I think because of this, even if we do regret it in the meantime, I see an asymmetry of risks in favor of building the infrastructure if in doubt.
Tim Bosch.
Can I add just one
Yeah.
point? I think overbuilding infrastructure is a useful thing to do from a resilience perspective, because it gives you a certain security. If something else doesn't work, you could use this. So I think we shouldn't focus at this moment in time to just make it as small as possible.
Great. Since we're running out of time, I'm going to take the 3 questions. The 3 people who raised the question. So first Tim Bosch, then Sven, again, then Hans-Josef. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. My name is Tim Bosch. I work at the German Council on Foreign Relations. I wanted to briefly come back to this question of whether it matters that the Energiewende is kind of still uniquely German term or not, because I think that is more than just a theoretical discussion in some ways. Because I work on climate foreign policy, I can say that this was kind of building a lot of Germany's climate diplomacy abroad. Yeah, so being an early starter in the energy transition built a lot of legitimacy to engage abroad in a liberal kind of approach. You know, you export your domestic business model, right? That said, I don't think that we can't have a German foreign policy going forward without Energiewende. We'll just have to reinvent it and live in a world where that's not a unique selling point anymore, right? But I think it requires some harder thinking of what we can offer to others in foreign policy engagement.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to one thing that you said, Simon, in your very sort of gripping and very concisive, actually, wrap up of where the energy transition is right now, and that's the question about the future prospect model. And I totally agree with you that the investment environment in Germany is not good at the moment towards any future development. And I would add that the biggest impediment now is our complete failure to accept that the world is going to go digital. I mean, we're now going reluctantly, but it's so behind that this is a major problem. However, I would, caution a little bit of ringing the death knell, both over the sort of traditional industries that we have, and we always focus on the big industry players, and there is a lot of question marks, that's true. But underneath this, and I think this builds on the story that we've been talking about of the energy transition, there is a sort of knowledge pool that is already starting to build new things. I mean, maybe you should come to Neukölln more often, to the 1,5 of this world, and Enerpulse and Sunfires, and I don't know, that are not big brand names yet, and they may never be if we don't let them. But the pool is there, and I think they can build on that. So I wouldn't be too pessimistic. And the other question you have to ask yourself in that regard is it really, the thing of the future to have, global players like, I mean, we now see the flip side of having global players like Volkswagen or so on. So maybe that might not be even something to strive for. That's just a thought on that front. But I agree on the investment front, that is definitely not the environment you want for any future development.
Thank you very much. Hans-Josef.
Hans-Josef Fell. I find the question of Jakob Schland very, very impressive and very important. Is it really the only way to go to such big hydrogen solutions in clean tech sector? I personally see in my long life the third time pushing of hydrogen. The first was in the middle of the 90s. And at the end, it was a lot of public stranded investment, nothing else. The second was around 2010, the same, no result. We should learn from that. And we should look much more to innovative, clean technologies that can replace hydrogen. Hydrogen can play a role in some places, yes, but not in this huge amount what we discuss it with a grid and with anything else. Ms. Schmidt told one example, high temperature heat storage. It is wonderful to fill it up with electricity and bring it to the glass industry and others who need high temperature. It's much cheaper than hydrogen. Much easier. Or we have it in other technologies, chemical industry. We could replace the fossil chemistry completely by plant-based chemistry. Plants, mushrooms, algae, and a lot of others. And it is really green, and it is a circular economy when we design it on a right way. So the sentence, there is an unavoidable emission, is a very, very problematic sentence. We have a lot of alternatives in plenty other issues. And what I do not see is that we give the focus on the alternatives on hydrogen. I think that is very important for the next future. Look to alternatives.
Thank you very much. Any final comments? No? Then I think we'll leave it there. I will just, well, I think Simon's point about getting some movement in the room, I'll just stand up again here. But I think, again, as we heard here today, Germany's transformational and multi-decadal Energiewende project has seen the country implement a raft of policies at local, regional, and national levels to accelerate the deployment of renewables, in particular, on a massive scale. Previously, experts have described the phenomenon as a linchpin for the world's attempt to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius, noting that as Europe's economic powerhouse and 4th largest economy in the world, Germany is a critical case for energy transitions, because if it succeeds in creating a decarbonized energy system that is affordable and reliable, the country will give a clear signal to the rest of the world that it can be done. In recent years, however, as we have also heard today, it has encountered significant challenges and headwinds, but also found new opportunities, especially as the so-called Zeitenwende, following the outbreak of war in Ukraine, has dramatically pushed energy security in particular to the top of government agendas, with the Energiewende perceived as a key plank here. Of course, again, moving into this other area as well. Of course, much work still needs to be done to actually actualize this, and other countries are catching up, or in a number of cases exceeding, Germany's progress on this front. But the country nevertheless continues to be a much-watched case study when it comes to energy sector change and the broader low-carbon transition. We at the Center for Geopolitics and at the University of Cambridge really hope that this conference has provided a useful window into these developments, and that you have found the discussions insightful and thought-provoking. I certainly have, but then again, I am a bit biased here. Of course, I would first like to thank Dr. Eva Schmitz, Simon Müller, and of course Jörg Müllenhoff for their contributions to this final panel. If we can first give a round of applause to them, because I think this was, again, brilliant. And I encourage you all to continue the conversation after this. But again, I would like to thank everyone here to please, or ask everyone here to please join me in thanking all of our distinguished speakers for so generously sharing their time and expertise with us today, whether in Germany, in Brussels, or here in Cambridge. So again, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening and happy holidays. So thank you again very much.